But Alaska? Wait, where is that coming? I mean, that's just bizarre. I mean, yes, technically Russia and the U.S. are close there, but it's kind of the ass end of both countries. You know, it's
yeah. Do you trust that? I mean,
no, I mean, I don't. I mean, there's a logic point of me that says that, I mean, they understand in the U.S. that would probably mean nuclear war. I mean, like that if they did something, like it would definitely mean war. But the U.S., I mean, these aren't necessarily sane and rational people, and decapitation strikes have kind of become a hallmark of them in Israel, right? You know, Iran attempted decapitation strike, Hamas, Hezbollah, the assassination of Qasem Soleimani, which Trump was, by the way, just obscenely gloating about in the last week again. Yeah, I don't trust it. I would not do this. This is the Kremlin's decision. I think it's a mistake. I think it's a mistake to have this meeting.
I think showing confidence. I mean, what's the motivation for him to go to Alaska? Russia owes the U.S. nothing on this. The U.S. started a war that got hundreds of thousands of Russians killed.
So my take is that the Kremlin is still engaged in what you might consider diplomatic maneuvering, right? They recognize that Trump is in a bad position, right, geopolitically, because he's got to preserve a failing proxy regime in Kiev, even if he doesn't much like Zelensky, and he has nothing but contempt for him, even if he doesn't like European leaders, even if he personally doesn't give a flying fig about Ukraine. Yes, all of that is true at some level, but he's still the U.S. president. He's still the leader of U.S.-led Western hegemony, and there are enormous institutional pressures from Congress, from the deep state, from the media, from the European, everything on him that demands that he do something to save that proxy regime, right? And a frozen conflict is about the only thing that can save it right now, right? You know, ending it on the contact lines, which is what is being presented more or less. That's what he's trying to do. And in a way, this is Minsk 3, Minsk 4, right? I mean, this is
well, unless you talk about Istanbul agreements, but
so because that's what they're attempting to do, right? Once again, having failed at the escalate to de-escalate, right? They're now going to the diplomatic track, and what they're ultimately trying to do is freeze the conflict and rebuild Kiev. Right. That ultimately that's what they're trying to do, because they're certainly not preparing to surrender Kiev. Right. That is something that Trump knows that he can't do. Right. If he mollifies Russia with a little bit of territory. Now, you notice the things that aren't being talked about. Right. First of all, Russia's not saying anything. Right. As Russia does. Right. You're hearing all kinds of different reports from Bloomberg, from the Wall Street Journal, saying different things about what the U.S. proposed and what they will be talking about in Alaska, supposedly. This idea of a land swap. And what they're talking there, essentially, is parts of Ukrainian territory, right? So the Kiev regime still holds on to parts of Donetsk, right? And parts of Kherson and Zaporozhye. In Kherson and Zaporozhye, of course, it's actually the capital cities of those two regions that they hold. And Russia holds Ukrainian territory also in Kharkov region, in Sumy region, and some now in Dnipropetrovsk region, right? Then there's also the small little Kinburn Spit, which is actually part of Mykolaiv region. That's another story. Small. So the idea being floated is either, right, first of all, let's make it clear. Ukraine holds no Russian territory, right? There's some people in the Western media that are still trying to claim that there's 1 or 2 square kilometers of forest, because Zelensky is saying that. It's not true. There's no Russian territory, right? That was ended quite a while ago. So the idea is that these excess territories would be traded for the rest of the territory of the Donbass, or if Russia is still sticking by their guns, which I believe they would, the rest of Donbass and the rest of Kherson and Zaporozhye. And that is where the Western media accounts diverge. So we have no clear picture of that there. But what no one is talking about still is Ukraine and NATO.
Right.
And
which is the issue.
And how that, I mean, to me, that's the most important issue. There are lots of other issues, but that's the most important issue, right? Ultimately, in strategic terms. And that's not being talked about. And there's no talk about how Trump could guarantee that into the future for future U.S. leaders, right? So forth, right? So there's no discussion of that happening at all in the public view, at least. There's no talk of demilitarization, which is part of Russia's, primary. They would limit the size of a future Ukrainian military to quite small, right? A constitutional return to neutrality that they had before the U.S. backed putsch in 2014, which, by the way, is why all of Zelensky's claims, I can't possibly give up land, it's in the Ukrainian constitution. Well, that's really funny, because the way you got rid of Yanukovych was against the Ukrainian constitution. And you changing your constitution away from neutrality towards an enemy of Russia and joining NATO, enshrining you, that wasn't in your constitution. It is now, and so forth. I mean, they've made lots of changes to their constitution, so that's a nonsense argument, right? But he's using that as a fig leaf, a shield at this point. That's not being talked. And the denazification, the de-banderization of Ukraine, which, I'm sorry, is only possible, and even then to a very, shall we say, contested degree, if Russia physically occupies all of Ukraine, as far as I'm concerned, right? Nothing else would meet that, right? Until they're prevented from their lustration, preventing them from holding political office, taking away all of the gazillion things in Ukraine that have been renamed after Bandera and Shukovich, until Azov and 36 other Banderite groupings and battalions and political movements are banned, until they're rooted out of the police, the security services, the military, right? That's a major, it can't really happen, right? And of course, that's the biggest fudge area. And there may be an assessment at some point in the Kremlin that, we just can't do that, right? And that is, shall we say, negotiation room, that there still will be a anti-Russia at the end of this. I think that would be a titanic mistake. Personally, I've long held that position going back to 2014. But, I don't decide things, for the Kremlin, and they've got a lot more intelligence, behind the scenes than I do. So that, they will make their call, and I will armchair it, as will all of us. But that's not being talked about, and that makes me very suspicious about what's going on. We know Rubio let slip that the U.S. and Russia have actually held discussions, right? Physical discussions, maybe on the sidelines of one of the Istanbul meetings, that were not made public, right? So there may have already been some feeling each other out on these things happening. But of course, the big story of this is not only is Putin going to Alaska, and then supposedly for the next meeting in a process, if that happens, Trump would then come to Russia. That's the quid pro quo.
Really?
Yeah, that's,
I didn't hear that part.
That's actually been said. Yes, yeah. The West isn't talking about it, but Russia is talking about it. That's what was agreed on. So, for me, it is a concession that Putin made to Trump to meet with him in person. Right now,
the question is, what is that concession?
Yeah. The meeting itself is a concession.
You mean coming to Alaska in and of itself is a concession?
Yeah, meeting him now. Putin they've been saying just the week ago, they were saying, yes, Putin and Trump will meet someday when all the diplomatic work is the hard diplomatic work is done, and there's something with an agenda and something for them to sign and make real progress at the end of it, right? They don't want a photo op where Trump pressures Putin to things that Putin has to say no to, right? That was what that could potentially then lead to some type of emotional tantrum and escalation from Trump. Big Trump thinks that if I can just meet with him physically, right, my ginormous ego and charisma will somehow make him concede on things that he's long held positions that are unacceptable to us for over a year. And so that's what he thinks, right? That's his art of the deal, right? That's what he thinks. And Russia knows that that's the way Trump works, and that's why they've tried to avoid it. But they've agreed to this now. So the question is why? Because...
Well, I was just going to say, I mean, the way that the Russians say, Trump offered something that the Russians thought were acceptable, or at the very least,
that's
a negotiation point.
That's something that Ushakov said.
Right.
And it's not been elaborated on at all. So a lot of people are perhaps reading more into it than is there, or maybe not. Maybe there is, right? Maybe this land swap that Trump is mentioning has been worked out to a greater degree, right, than we know. We don't know.
Right.
I think that the Kremlin realized that Trump is in a bad position. He's in a bad position geopolitically over this, right? He needs to save a Kiev regime, and he's a bad position diplomatically, domestically, because he's promised all sorts of things, but he's bluffed and blustered, and his bluff has been called, and he can't go through with further tariffs because of the economic consequences, the backlash, the high inflation, the price of gasoline in the U.S. rocketing up, etc. He can't go through with that. So he needs distraction. He needs an escape clause. And I guess he's not comfortable throwing the Epstein files out to distract him. So hence, Russia has agreed to this meeting. Now, what I believe is not that Russia is, I do not believe that the Kremlin would actually agree to a land swap that kept the Kiev regime in power. Certainly one that did not give them all of Kherson and Zaporozhye, and that just resulted in a frozen conflict, and with them still talking about dragging Ukraine into NATO and the EU and rebuilding it and everything.
Right.
I think that the Kremlin understands that the EU and Kiev will never agree to any of this, no matter what Trump does, right? Trump has shown great ability to leverage European leaders on trade issues and gotten them to roll over on tariffs, but not on anything geopolitical. The opposite, right? Trump has, over the last few months, been nudged and leaned and lured ever closer to the Kellogg-Macron Starmer position, right? Than he was when he first came in and things that were said. So he has gone more in the Kiev regime direction over the last few months. Now we see this suddenly from their perspective about face, and everyone is screaming and crying and everything. But Trump, I do not believe, has the ability to force Kiev and Europe to do what he says on this, right? I don't think that is something that will even be, shall we say, embraced by much of the U.S. government. Right? Congress will be completely against it, right? Both sides of Congress, right? Yes, Marjorie Taylor Greene may agree. Again, the opinion of the majority of Congress on both sides is clearly known on this. The deep state, the blob, right? The media, right? Everyone will be against this, right? So there'll be huge institutional pressure from within the U.S. Europe and Kiev will never agree to it. And I think the Kremlin, thinking, just a move or two ahead in chess terms, understands that. And they're playing a diplomatic maneuver here. They know that this is not going to be, if there's an agreement, and hands are shaken, and Putin and Trump are smile at each other. They still know that this will never be instituted, that this will collapse in no time, right? It will never be agreed upon, and it will be back to, or it will never stop the movement on the battlefield. For instance, one of the things that's being discussed in the Western media, again, without confirmation, is that the first step in this process would be the Kiev regime withdrawing from all of Donbass at the least, right? And only then would there be a ceasefire.
It would have to be.
Yeah, and they won't do that, right? So that's the end right there, right? So things may never even stop. But I think the Kremlin is calculating that going through this process and having Kiev and Europe sabotage it, as they inevitably will, and we'll be lucky if we don't see false flags and provocations and everything else in the next week or so, right? But that they will sabotage it, and then Trump's anger, right, will be redirected back at Kiev, at Zelensky and the Europeans. And that will provide Trump with another opportunity, as if he hasn't had enough already, to walk away from this, right? And at the very least, it will cause further damage in the U.S.-European relationship, the transatlantic relationship over this. And that's why I think that and they're also, shall we say, giving a sop to Russia's allies in the BRICS, saying, look, we're trying hard to go through the diplomatic process, but what can you do, right?
Yeah. So
that is kind of a solve on Modi, oh, let me kiss the boo-boo that Trump gave you, that sort of thing. That's another a diplomatic angle on why Russia is going through this charade. Now, my personal opinion is that both sides are going to regret this meeting, because whatever is agreed to or not agreed to, it will never actually be implemented anyway, right? I don't believe that there's any chance of it being implemented, not at the current time. There's just, that's not a possibility on the battlefield or politically for Kiev or Europe. And that means that we don't know where Trump's anger coming out of this is going to end up, because he's the chaotic bouncing Betsy bomb, right? Your mind, whatever, you don't know where his anger is going to lie. I know he thinks that he's kicking the can down the road of his punitive tariffs threat and everything that he can't follow through on, and he's distracting, and now he doesn't have to follow through on it. But that's only kicking the can down the road. And then he's going to have to pay a greater penalty for, quote unquote, surrendering Ukraine to Putin, because that will inevitably be the dominant narrative being pounded through the media, being yelled at from Congress, everything else that will come out of this. So ultimately, I don't believe it will improve his domestic position. I think it will worsen it. And if Trump comes out of this angry, and that falls on Russia, then there's a renewed, return to escalate to de-escalate, then that will end badly for Russia. So I don't think that this bodes well. I think that there's no possibility of anything. First of all, is something agreed upon? If it is agreed upon just between the U.S. and Russia, it can still never come to fruition, because Kiev and Europe will never agree to it. And then how does the diplomatic cards of the disappointment and frustration of Trump fall out, and how much is domestic political feces does he take from it?
Let's assume for the moment that Trump is not interested in Ukraine, which I don't think he is. Let's assume for the moment that he's an American president, and well, he is, but we don't have to assume that. But as an American president, he's stuck with various.
Yeah, he has little power. He has limited options.
He has no cards in this process, but he has to look tough and save face in this process.
He's always got to win too. His ego demands that, right? Trump always has to win, right?
But this is not a process where you can win, because he has no cards. Now, he had to look like it at the very least. Let's assume that you're right, that he goes through this process. The U.S. and Russia has already a tentative something in mind. Because again, the notion that Putin would come to Alaska only to tell Trump no is amazing to me. Looks like they would have to
I don't think
have
he has to tell him no, though. That's the thing. He can tell him yes, and it will still be no because Kiev and Europe won't go through it. I mean, they will never agree to it.
Putin can't give more than what he has already told.
Putin can say, I will agree to this if the following steps are followed. And if the steps are not followed, then it's not my fault, it's their fault.
Okay, but he can't say, okay, you can take Kherson and you can take Zaporozhye, and I'm just
he will say this is the beginning of a diplomatic process. And the first step is this. And then there are other possible steps, right, that can be firmed out later if that first step is met. But if that first step is not met, well, then, it's a...
If Europe balks, and if Ukraine balks, which they already have, by the way, they've already rejected anything that they're trying to come up with. It gives Trump the ability to walk. Hey, I tried it.
Again,
Well, you don't think he could do that? I mean, because from my point of view, he's like, look, I did everything I could. I tried to bring these guys together. They're both horrible people. I have other concerns. They're blocking me. They're blocking me about. Or you don't think he could do that?
Look, there is no question that less military aid has flowed to the U.S. or to the Kiev regime in Ukraine from the U.S. in the last 6 months than in the last 6 months of life. There's no question about that. There's also true that some military aid has gone through, right? Not only the stuff that Biden agreed to in long-term contracts, the monthly production of the military-industrial complex and everything, right? But there have been smaller, I would call them maintenance packages, of 100, 200 million here, 300 million there that Trump has signed off on as well. And they have not been widely talked about, but they've been happened and reported, right? So that, again, that alone can make the conflict still drag it on for another year or so. Again, depending on where Russia stops, right? Because Ukraine is a big country, and militarily occupying Ukraine, how much of Ukraine are we talking, is a big deal. That's lots of troops. That's lots of economic responsibility. It's a tall order. So we don't know where the Kremlin is ultimately going to stop, assuming that the battlefield moves forward. Europe can still keep the Kiev regime forces fighting. I mean, they could still conscript 18 to 25-year-olds and add another 100 or 200,000 bodies to it. They've talked multiple times about conscripting women. They've begun the training of 14-year-olds in schools. They've now allowed the recruitment of people over the age of 60. They can keep this going, right? Not because that will present an effective military resistance, simply because Ukraine is big, and rooting out every building from every 60-year-old guy or 19-year-old guy given a gun and backed up by even drones, it still takes time. It's still difficult, right? This could be dragged out longer, and Russia doesn't want it dragged out longer, but they're fully prepared for it. And it can be dragged out that way, even with the level of the tepid level of support that's coming from Trump now. Russia would like Trump to drop even that tepid level of support, because that means it could be finished to a greater extent faster, right? At a less cost to Russia. But how likely is that? How much power does Trump have to surrender Ukraine in the face of opposition from both houses of Congress, from the deep state, from many people within his own administration, from the media, from the Europeans? The US president has enormous powers on paper, but when it comes to key geopolitical issues like this that are matters of world order and US-led hegemony, I don't think he actually has that much power. He may want to, at one level, when he talks to one person, to wipe his hands of this whole thing, but he can't do it. He can't. He's the US president. And the game goes on.
Personally, I think he can create a context where he doesn't. Trump, beyond any other president that I've seen, has this ability to just not care. Like, I give you another example. When the financial system was crashing and Trump was like, I'm sanctioning the world, and you had the stock market falling like 1,000 points a day. Usually a president wouldn't be able to withstand that. Trump was eating hamburgers, didn't care in the least. The only time Trump cared is when, hey, the full faith and credit of the U.S. was being challenged.
But he also backed off the tariff war on the world.
He did, but he backed off the tariff war because the bond market was flipping out. And they were telling them, hey, the faith and credit of the U.S. government is under threat and attack. And that's when he said, okay. When stocks were dropping 1,000 points a day for like a week, Trump didn't care one iota. I agree with you that it's a heavy, tall order for a U.S. president to be like, I'm done. Yeah. I'm out. I quit. And they say, oh my God, you're abandoning Ukraine.
He's already said, I'm going to quit. How many times already? I mean, how many times has he said it? And has he done it? No. I'm a cynic and a realist, right? I cannot hope that Trump will do the logical thing when he is surrounded by so many people and institutions compelling him to do the opposite. I just can't count. If you want to hope on that, that's fine. If I'm wrong on that one, I'm willing and eager to be wrong on that one. I don't
I'm not postulating anything. I'm not saying that's true. I'm saying of everybody, he is the only one that would have the stones.
If it was at all possible under any president, sure. It is more possible under Trump than anyone else we could conceive of at this moment being elected in the United States, simply because he loves flipping the bird at the establishment whenever he can get away with it, right? Yeah. I just don't think that this is going to be one of those situations.
So last question. If you had to make a prediction about Alaska, nothing comes out, or something comes out, but it's not into the war. It's ultimately
there's definitely going to be something that comes out of it, right? It's a bit photo op between the U.S. and Putin.
Right.
They've got to sign something. They've got to smile, and they've got to talk noise about how great it is. But let's come back to that a month later then and see how much of it is actually implemented. And, if not, or to what extent it's not, what the consequences are.
But for all intents and purposes, the Russian military is not going to stop until things are implemented. And
they may slow down a bit. There may be less nightly drone than missile strikes on Kiev for a while, right? That may be a diplomatic nod being made, but that's about it. They're certainly not going to stop moving in Pokrovsk and Seversk and Liman and Kupiansk and everywhere else where they're now, making, again, always good, more rapid progress than they were before.
Mark, you are fantastic. Great breakdown. I suppose we'll see what happens on Friday.
Yep.
I'm super curious.
We'll all be tuning into the Trump-Putin show in Alaska.
Right? I know.
That's what Trump wants. I mean, he wants everyone watching his show. I mean, he's I always, with Trump, I always come back to this scene from the original Gladiator, Scott Ridley's Gladiator, where Maximus is on the floor of the Colosseum. I think it's one of the lesser ones earlier in the thing. And he turns to the crowd after he's finished off the opponent, and he goes, "Are you not entertained? Is that not why you are here?" That is why the American people elected Trump, because they wanted to be entertained. Why the hell else would this guy be elected, right? And we're all going to be entertained on Friday, one way or another. I don't like the idea of Putin going to Alaska.
Neither do I.
It's a mistake. It makes me very nervous in here. If they do something stupid, just be aware that, hey, tell everyone you love that you love them. That's all I'm saying.
Well, that's the other catch, right? It's so extreme. Like the reality of anything happening would create a response out of Russia that would just be breathtaking.
Yeah.
But again, you have a Kiev government that, all things being equal, wants to draw the U.S. into a conflict, and the U.S. may do it and blame Kiev. I don't think that would matter.
And it doesn't have, it could be someone in the U.S. deep state, right?
Yeah.
Acting on their own. It's quite obvious that Trump doesn't have complete. Look at all the leaks that happen all the time. That he, I don't. It makes me very uncomfortable. I don't like it.
Mark, like Archduke Ferdinand, right? It's like, hey, the Serbs did it. It's like, well, no, we didn't do it. It was black group.
I just don't think there was any reason. If he has to agree to this, I'm sorry, this theater, if he had to agree to it, then it should have been the UAE. It should not have been Alaska.
Yeah, agreed. Which is what I thought it was going to be. But oh well. Mark Sleobda. Mark Sleobda, International Relations Security Analyst. You can follow Mark on Boosty, Boosty, under Real Politic with Mark Sleobda, or just Mark Sleobda himself. You can also find him on Twitter at Mark Sleobda1. Mark, you are fantastic, man. Thank you for this.
Thanks for having me.
You be safe. All right. Mark, with his damn good analysis as